Have you ever thought that something that occurred to you in the fetus could actually show up 20 years later and impact you? You've never thought about that? Stay tuned. Listen to this podcast. I'm MysterE. This is MysterE's Mysteries, and we're going to be talking about all things mysterious in the world of psychology. The environment in which a fetus lives is pretty incredible. And that connection between the mom and the fetus is pretty amazing. What we're going to address today is how that pathway can get a little sideways. And what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about how the flu virus can actually lead to a person developing schizophrenia 20 years after they're born. It is a crazy, crazy thing. You know, I oftentimes wonder, like, where do scientists come up with these correlations? Where do they come up with these risk factors, right? It's so crazy. So, okay, so here we go. This is how it works. Yeah, I clapped into the mic. That's how excited I am about this. Okay, it is crazy. It's crazy. It's crazy. So scientists were looking at schizophrenia, and they're like, okay, what can we look at? Let's look at birth dates. Okay, sure. What's to see in a birth date? Well, they looked at the birth dates, and what they saw in the United States, 70% of all schizophrenics are born in late spring. That's a pretty hefty percentage. Now, if you were born in late spring, don't get stressed out because there is a very powerful genetic factor that is involved with schizophrenia as well. But let's go ahead and talk about the in utero environment and schizophrenia. So this is what scientists looked at. All right, why are all of these children who are born in late spring developing schizophrenia in their late teens or early 20s? Could there be a connection? Now, there might not be, right? They don't know for sure at this time, but they're like, let's go ahead and take a look. So what could it be? Well, late spring, United States, seasonal allergies. Well, who knows? Maybe, right? So they're thinking about all of these different things. And they're like, well, we know of these things called teratogens. Teratogens are going to be chemicals that infiltrate. They pass from the mother to the fetus, and they can impact negatively the fetus. They're going to be chemicals. They're going to be some medicines, and they can be also bacteria and viruses. You probably have heard of fetal alcohol syndrome, and you might have heard of the incredibly horrible term, but when a fetus is exposed to crack cocaine and then is born with certain symptoms. And so we know that what the mother puts into her body can influence the outcome of the baby. But now they're thinking, could something that enters through the mother in the second trimester influence the development of schizophrenia 20 years later? Let's go ahead and take a look. So they went ahead and scientists interviewed all of these mothers of schizophrenics. And they interviewed them, and they talked about, did you have a flu shot, those types of things. And then they got to the crux of their discussion. Then they asked, did you suffer from a case of the flu? And then this was not morning sickness. This was the flu. And almost 100%, over 90% of them actually said that, yes, I not only suffered from the flu, but I suffered from a pretty bad case of the flu. So they took blood samples, and they took blood samples of these women, and they discovered that they had the antibodies for the flu virus that was most predominant during that winter. So what they hypothesized is that the mothers in the second trimester were exposed to high levels of this flu virus. The flu viruses can pass through the blood-brain barrier. And so the virus went from the mom to the fetus, into the fetus's brain, and impacted the development of the fetus brain. And we get to MRIs that are taken, magnetic resonance imaging. So pictures that are taken of schizophrenic brains. And we compare a schizophrenic brain from a non-schizophrenic brain, and we find that the schizophrenic brain has a whole lot less gray matter, which is axons, connections, that sort of thing. There's a lot less gray matter, and there's a lot more cerebral spinal fluid, which is the fluid that takes up space wherever there's not brain matter. So if you look at a schizophrenic brain compared to a non-schizophrenic brain, they're drastically different. So the theory is that the flu virus has passed through this blood-brain barrier, has infiltrated this brain tissue, has stopped some of it from being developed, and has impacted 20 years later the signs and symptoms of schizophrenia. Now, there's one more piece of evidence that is not only interesting in relationship to influenza and schizophrenia, it's also really interesting when it comes to identical twins. I have a friend who has twin daughters, and I told him about this, and a lot of people don't know this, but fraternal twins, if you don't know, most people know this, fraternal twins have a separate egg, separate sperm. Okay, so they have different DNA, right? And they're not any more similar than another one of their siblings. But an identical twin, they share the same egg and the same sperm that splits, okay? And most people know the difference between identical twins and fraternal twins, but this is a part that my buddy wasn't really sure of. And that's this. Fraternal twins always have two placentas. Okay. Identical twins oftentimes share the same placenta, but there are times where identical twins have two separate placentas. Okay. So stick with me here. When you have two separate placentas with identical twins, they have the same exact genetics, but they have somewhat different environmental stuff, okay, chemicals, nutrients, etc., that are passing from the placenta to give them nutrients to survive. So their internal environment for two identical twins can be different. It's not very common for them to have two separate placentas, but it does happen. Now, if you have a twin, a fraternal twin with schizophrenia, there is a 10% chance that the other fraternal twin will have schizophrenia. When the likelihood of people in the United States, it's at just roughly a little under 1%. That 10% is relatively high. But now listen to this. If you have an identical twin with schizophrenia, that jumps up to 50%. Okay? So identical twins with schizophrenia, that jumps up to 50%. Okay? So it's much, and we can say that could be genetically based, right? But this is when it gets crazy. Remember how I said identical twins can have two different placentas? When the identical twins have two different placentas, okay, so somewhat different internal environment, that 50% drops down to 10%. So those identical twins now have the same likelihood of developing schizophrenia as fraternal twins. So is it genetics or is it that internal environment? Now, most identical twins have one placenta. And when they have that one placenta, the likelihood, if one identical twin has schizophrenia, the likelihood that the other identical twin has schizophrenia will jump up to 60%. So if you look at that, if they share the exact same environment, there's a 60% chance that if one has schizophrenia, the other will have schizophrenia. If they have two different environments and they're identical twins, that percentage drops down to 10%. So how much of it is genetics and how much of it is that uterus environment, the placental nutrients that are being passed to the fetus? So interesting to think about. But I bet that's something that you never heard of. Now, if you are interested in that, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the uterus and the fetus and the internal environment and sexuality. So stay tuned for that episode. Hopefully that'll get you interested in listening for more. So I am MysterE. This is MysterE's Mysteries. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Make sure you subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple, anywhere that you can find podcasts. Make sure you follow us on YouTube. We're getting lots of hits on our YouTube channel, specifically our YouTube Shorts. Check us out there. And once again, thanks to the guy that creates all those YouTube Shorts, my director and producer, Bear Wade. Get in touch with us if you need somebody to help you market your new podcast. If you want to become an influencer of any sort, he is the man. I hope you all have a great day. See ya.